I knew I was finished the moment Meredith from HR asked me to step into the boardroom. No small talk, no smile. Just the kind of tone you use when someone's already been erased. The CFO sat waiting with his papers, rehearsed sympathy dripping off every word. But while they spoke of transition packages and graceful exits, I kept my eyes on the clock. At exactly 9:15, the compliance servers I built would begin their quarterly sync. And for the first time in a decade, I hadn't renewed their licenses. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. They called it an exit meeting, but there was nothing graceful about it. I walked into the boardroom and instantly knew I was being erased. Meredith Lane from HR was already seated, her clipboard angled toward the chair set aside for me, a box of tissues placed in reach, as if they expected me to collapse into tears. Daniel Brooks, the CFO, leaned back at the far end of the polished oak table, hands folded like a preacher waiting to deliver last rites. Jacob Foster, the CEO, wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. Men like him never do their own dirty work. They send Daniel to wrap it in numbers and Meredith to make it sound humane. I sat down anyway, because I wanted to hear how they would phrase it. Daniel started with the script. Emily, as we prepare for the next phase of growth, we're making certain adjustments to present a more streamlined face to our investors. It's nothing personal. I didn't respond. Not because I was stunned, but because I had already calculated the timing. Behind Daniel's words, I heard the quiet tick of my watch. 9:14. 1 minute to go. Daniel shifted in his chair, mistaking my silence for resistance. Look, the truth is, the board feels your record has too many pauses, transitions. Investors don't like complicated timelines. We need cohesion. Meredith added her soft cadence, the kind of voice designed for yoga studios and customer service lines. You've been such a valuable contributor, Emily. We'd like this to be as smooth as possible. I almost laughed. Valuable enough to build the compliance framework that kept the SEC out of their hair for a decade, but not valuable enough to stand beside them in front of investors. They wanted me gone because I wasn't glossy, because my story included time off to care for my sick mother, because I'd worked in the trenches instead of schmoozing on stage. At 9:15, the servers I had built would start their quarterly sync. This time, the licenses would fail. Not because I sabotaged anything, but because I'd simply chosen not to renew them. I hadn't forged chaos. I'd just let the truth catch up. Daniel was still talking, outlining severance, outplacement services, the language they used to coat betrayal in civility. Meredith slid a folder across the table. If you could sign here, we'll get this wrapped up quickly. I looked down at the papers, then back at Daniel. His phone buzzed once. He silenced it. Then again. His jaw tightened. Another buzz. He tried to keep going, but his words faltered. The alerts had begun. I stood, placed the pen neatly on top of the folder and said, "Put it all in writing." Then I walked out. Not slamming the door, not crying, not begging. Just leaving. While the system I created began its work. For 10 years, I was the part of the company no one ever wanted to talk about. The executives loved their stage lights, their press interviews, their photo ops with investors. They threw around words like innovation and transformation while sipping cocktails in glass towers. Meanwhile, I sat in a windowless floor lined with gray cubicles and built the only thing that kept the entire operation alive: compliance. While they waved their hands in front of cameras, I designed the framework that made sure regulators never knocked at the door. I handled certifications, renewals, automated audit trails, data protections, everything that meant millions in avoided fines. Without me, every quarterly sync would have been a minefield. With me, they never even thought about it. That was the irony. I was their invisible spine, too reliable to be noticed. They assumed safety was natural, that compliance just existed in the air they breathed, instead of being written, updated, and defended by me year after year. And because my work prevented disasters instead of producing applause, it was easy for them to erase me. Daniel Brooks was the loudest voice on the executive team, forever pushing for glossy investor decks and clean narratives. To him, I was a distraction, a line in a story that didn't fit his arc. Investors want cohesion, he used to say. We can't have long medical leaves, family emergencies, maternity breaks cluttering up the pitch. He said it like I was a typo on a resume, not the reason his balance sheet was stable. When I overheard in a budget review that they were planning to phase me out by the end of the fiscal year, I didn't shout or fight. I just listened. They were confident they could replace me with a cheaper consultant. Plug and play, Daniel called it. They didn't realize that what I had built wasn't plug and play. It was blood and precision. That was when I stopped renewing licenses. Not out of spite, not even at first out of revenge. I told myself I was conserving budget, that I was trimming the fat they were so eager to cut. But underneath that excuse was the truth. I was done protecting people who wanted me invisible. Every system I had architected was designed to work flawlessly until its keys expired. And those keys were all on a clock, just like me. They thought they could erase the architect and keep the structure standing. They were wrong. As the expiration dates crept closer, I didn't patch them. I didn't request renewals. I just let the calendar do the work for me. By the time Daniel and Meredith were drafting my transition, the first cracks were already in place. The compliance servers weren't sabotaged, they were simply exposed. Like a bridge no one maintained, waiting for the moment wait would test it. The exit meeting was only the performance. The real story had been written quietly, for months, in the silence of my decisions. And at 9:15, that story would finally speak. At exactly 9:15, the first sync initiated. It was automatic, a cycle I had personally designed years ago to keep the company clean and untouchable. Servers scanned certifications, checked expiration dates, and reported back with a simple verdict: compliant or non-compliant. Normally, those green checks would cascade across dashboards like dominoes falling in our favor. This time, the screen showed red. The first non-compliance alert hit the inboxes of senior staff at 9:16. By 9:18, 3 more followed. At 9:20, the entire Midwest branch was flagged for audit review. It wasn't dramatic. No explosions, no flashing red alarms. It was worse than that. It was quiet, methodical, bureaucratic, undeniable. The system wasn't failing. It was exposing. Down the hall, Daniel Brooks's phone buzzed again and again. He tried to keep his tone steady while continuing my so-called exit discussion, but his fingers twitched each time another notification vibrated across the table. By 9:25, he couldn't disguise it anymore. His face tightened, eyes darting toward the glowing screen he refused to pick up. Meredith Lane noticed too, shifting uncomfortably as the silence between us thickened. They didn't understand yet. But I did. I had written this rhythm, this cadence of escalation. By 9:30, 3 regional offices were under regulatory flag, meaning automatic investigation protocols. At 9:35, trading froze pending review. No one in that building knew it yet, but the gears were already turning, and nothing could stop them now. The regulators didn't care about optics, or transitions, or clean narratives for investors. They only cared about compliance. And compliance, in my system, had one truth. You either renewed or you paid. Daniel's phone buzzed one more time. This time he snatched it up, his eyes scanning, lips parting just slightly as the color drained from his face. I didn't need to see the screen to know what it said. I had written the message myself, years ago, when I built the fail-safes. Non-compliance detected. Immediate audit required. That was the sound of the first domino falling. The beauty of compliance is that it never moves in isolation. One flagged branch doesn't stay in a vacuum. It spreads like cracks across glass. At 10 a.m., the system logged its first full regional failure. By design, that triggered a chain reaction. If one division fails compliance, the holding company itself is placed under review. And once the holding company is under review, every subsidiary gets frozen. Contracts stall, accounts lock, payroll halts, vendors start calling, partners start pulling, investors start asking questions you can't afford to answer. I had written that framework with the goal of preventing negligence, making sure no executive ever risked exposure for personal convenience. Ironically, the system was now punishing the very arrogance it had been built to protect. By mid-morning, desks on the trading floor were buzzing with confusion. Screens that normally filled with live numbers suddenly froze. An assistant rushed past me in the hallway, clutching a phone and whispering to someone on the other end, "No, it's not just us. It's everywhere." The CFO had vanished from the boardroom, Meredith trailing after him with her folder clutched tight against her chest like a shield. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I already knew what the next hours would look like. At 11 a.m., the system escalated further, freezing not only transactions but also third-party agreements. Legal partners received automatic notifications, forcing them to suspend deals until compliance could be restored. Calls poured in from every corner of the country, banks demanding explanations, regulators requesting immediate documentation, suppliers refusing to ship product until they had clearance. By lunchtime, the first partner had pulled out entirely. A lucrative contract with a West Coast financial firm collapsed in real time. By 2 p.m., another partner announced they were suspending negotiations, pending further clarification. Those words were corporate speak for, "We don't trust you anymore." And by 3 p.m., it broke into the open. A financial news outlet posted the headline that would become the company's death sentence: "Major firm faces multi-million-dollar fines after compliance breakdown." That was all it took. Once the media had it, the narrative was gone. No investor deck, no polished CEO letter, no calm voice from HR could undo what the world had already decided. This company was tainted. I watched it unfold not with glee, but with a cold satisfaction. I had designed this system to be airtight, to protect against precisely this kind of collapse. The irony was they believed they could erase me without erasing the protections I controlled. The protections didn't vanish. They simply stopped shielding them. And now every layer of the machine I had built was turning inward, exposing their negligence in the most public way possible. I thought about the years I spent in that basement office, combing through statutes, translating legalese into code that regulators could trust. Every sleepless night, every ignored holiday, every forgotten thank you had been embedded into the skeleton of that system. They wanted me invisible. Now the system itself was making me unavoidable. By late afternoon, news vans were parked outside the headquarters, reporters camped on the steps, cameras angled at the glass doors where executives scurried in and out like mice in daylight. Inside, Jacob Foster finally emerged, flanked by Daniel Brooks and two grim-faced attorneys. They moved like men marching to their own funeral. I didn't need to hear their statements to know what they were about to say. They would promise transparency, assure stakeholders of swift resolutions, insist that everything was under control. But there was no control left to salvage. The dominoes were still falling, and each one carried more weight than the last. And as the cameras flashed and microphones clustered, I sat quietly at my desk, untouched and unbothered, while the system I had built dismantled them piece by piece. By the second morning, my phone lit up like a switchboard. Numbers I hadn't seen in years flooded my screen. Old colleagues, board assistants, even Jacob Foster's private line. Some left voicemails layered with urgency and forced warmth. Emily, we'd love to reconnect. Emily, the board is willing to make things right. And then the one that almost made me laugh, Daniel Brooks himself, voice cracking around the edges of his composure, offering, any compensation you want, if I would simply come back and stabilize the situation. Stabilize. As if the system I had built was a misbehaving child instead of a relentless machine doing exactly what it was designed to do. I didn't return a single call. I didn't text. I didn't even delete the voicemails. They stayed there, piling up like confessions in a locked drawer, proof that the power had shifted completely. By the third day, the messages grew shorter, less polite, more desperate. Emily, please, just talk to us. Emily, this can be fixed. But it couldn't, because by the time the first headlines had circulated, by the time partners had already withdrawn, the damage was public record. No rehire, no last-minute deal, no apology could scrub the stain of non-compliance once it reached the regulators. Their calls weren't about fixing the problem. They were about pretending it had never happened. And that was impossible. They had written me out of their story, erased me like a detail they thought wouldn't matter. Now they wanted me to step back in and rescue them from their own arrogance. I silenced the phone and set it face down on the table. For the first time in a decade, I didn't owe them anything. By the fourth day, the collapse had passed the point of embarrassment and entered the realm of inevitability. Regulators had moved in with the kind of efficiency only fear can trigger. Every expired certificate I had quietly left unrenewed. Every outdated license I had allowed to tick past its deadline. Every ignored renewal notice. They all surfaced in a single sweep. What the executives once dismissed as paperwork now looked like a wall of unpaid debts, each one demanding an answer. The irony was that I hadn't written a single line of sabotage. The system was functioning exactly as designed. It was doing its job. Only now it was doing it without me to shield them from themselves. That was the part Daniel Brooks and Meredith Lane could never explain to the board. Regulators didn't shut the company down outright. That would have been merciful. Instead, they did something far worse. They placed the firm under continuous monitoring. It meant auditors embedded in every division, monthly reviews, surprise inspections, and a constant bleed of resources. Every quarter, the company would spend millions just to prove they were following the rules they once thought beneath them. There was no public fix for that kind of damage. Investors might forgive a one-time fine, but no one would fund a firm chained to endless scrutiny. I imagined Daniel trying to explain it on an earnings call, sweating through his tie as he admitted that overhead had tripled just to keep the lights on. The truth was that the collapse wasn't explosive. It was suffocating. It was the slow tightening of a noose woven from their own negligence. They thought firing me was clean, strategic, invisible. What they never understood was that compliance isn't glamorous, it's relentless. And without me, it was merciless. I didn't need to lift a finger, didn't need to make a single phone call or push a single button. The audit trap had already closed around them, and the more they struggled, the deeper they sank. Watching from the outside, I felt no guilt. I had given them 10 years of protection, and in the end, the system spoke louder than I ever could. I didn't destroy the company. The truth is, they destroyed themselves the moment they believed compliance was optional and loyalty was disposable. All I did was step aside and let the system work the way it was meant to. They called it betrayal, when in reality it was simply consequence. Every expired license, every missed renewal, every blind spot they ignored had been written into the framework for years. They thought they could erase me and keep my protections. What they didn't realize was that those protections were me. Now, with regulators watching their every move and investors fleeing, the empire they flaunted has become a cautionary tale. I never raised my voice, never fought to be seen. I just let the structure I built speak for itself. And when it finally did, it delivered the cleanest truth possible. Revenge doesn't scream. It audits. I'll never forget the sound of Daniel's phone vibrating across the boardroom table while he tried to fire me. Because in that moment, I realized the collapse had already begun, and I didn't have to scream or fight to be heard. My silence was louder than their power. That moment taught me a truth many of us forget. Sometimes the most effective form of resistance is restraint. In a culture obsessed with quick comebacks and loud retaliation, there is real power in letting systems, habits, and consequences reveal the truth for you. My story wasn't about hacking or sabotage. It was about trust and loyalty being discarded, and the natural fallout that followed when people believed they were bigger than the structures that protected them. What this reminds me is that life, especially in work and relationships, is built on patterns we often take for granted. Just like my old firm believed compliance was automatic, many of us fall into the trap of thinking stability will last no matter how carelessly we treat the people who uphold it. But nothing maintains itself. Whether it's your health, your marriage, your friendships, or your career, the things that appear invisible are often the very pillars holding everything upright. Ignore them long enough, and collapse is inevitable. My revenge wasn't about grand explosions or dramatic confrontations. It was about allowing their own negligence to meet reality. That's a lesson worth holding on to. Sometimes you don't need to destroy people. You just need to stop saving them from themselves. And in life today, the same applies. At work, don't let someone else dictate your worth. Document your contributions, protect your leverage, and know when walking away is more powerful than staying to argue. In your personal life, don't tolerate being erased or minimized. You don't always need to scream to prove your value. Sometimes, your absence will do that better than your presence ever could. How to get started today. Take 10 minutes to list the invisible things you do every day, whether at work or at home, that keep systems or people running. Recognize that those quiet efforts are your leverage. Protect them. Set boundaries around them. And stop giving them away to people who don't respect them. If you've ever been underestimated, erased, or told you don't matter, I'd like to hear your story. Drop a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. Your voice, like mine, deserves to be remembered.